To thank everybody who's here with us today. So, in the name of my wife Claudia, my son Ian, my brother Charlie, Lori, where's Laura?
Right here, taping you.
Laura, Chase, and Charlotte. We want to do that. We want to thank everybody for being here. And but I want to say that it's not a standard gratitude. It's sort of special, and I'm going to say special in large part for two reasons that are born of what I'll just call this damn virus. The first reason is that my mom passed her last 5 months in terribly lonely circumstances. And instead of being surrounded by strangers as she was, it was all these faces that she would have. I'm just starting, it's 20 minutes long, you guys are gonna have to bear with me. It's all these faces she would have wanted and that she deserved to be surrounded by. And so that's the first reason. The second one is that, as I've mentioned to a couple of guests already, we recognize that there's a certain amount of risk to being here with us today. Depending on your perspective, in these crazy times, it might be a minuscule risk or it might be a huge risk, but there is a risk. And what makes our gratitude unusual is that your presence says so much more to us, speaks so much more loudly than it normally would about your affection and respect for my mom. So truly, thank you. I want to spend just a little time on sort of the biographical highlights of my mom's life. I know a lot of you are familiar with the second half. She arrived here in West Acres when she was 33 years old, but there were 33 years before that, and the story starts in 1937. My mom was a Great Depression baby. And she was born, well, the hospital was in a tiny town called Cairo, but my grandparents, the newlywed grandparents, her parents were living in the even smaller town of Mounds, Illinois, which had no hospital. And that year, well, you should know that those towns, when I say southern Illinois, they're right there where those two great rivers flow together, the Ohio River and the mighty Mississippi River. As my grandma, who was a bit of a southern girl, was fond of saying, they were within spitting distance of Kentucky. So in the year 1937, not only for the Great Depression, it was kind of significant, and those rivers were significant because my mom was born in November. But back in February of that year was what my grandma always called the Great Flood. And one of those two mighty rivers overflowed its banks and pretty much wiped away Mounds. And so the newlywed couple, my grandparents, along with the other good folks of Mounds, had to take refuge in a building on the highest grounds there. And as it would have it, that building turned out to be the funeral home. And so it was kind of a running joke in our family. The flood was in February. My mom was born in November. They were newlyweds. Life went on, romance went on for the newlyweds. My mom was, by all accounts, conceived in a funeral home. And being an appreciator of irony, I wondered if maybe she chose to pass right now so that she didn't have to end life at the same place she started it. It is kind of nicer here than a funeral home. So that was 1943. After that, Mounds started to rebuild. My mom lived her first few lives, and life went on from, did I say 43? I meant 37. until 1943. Of course, World War II had begun, and in that year, 5 years after the flood, my mom was 5, my grandparents packed them up and came up here north. It's never said to me, but surely it was looking for wartime economic opportunity in Detroit that might not have existed down there in mounds. So they arrived and rented a small apartment in Detroit. And my mom was an only child at that time, but the year had a lot to give them still. So in August, in fact, August 29th, yesterday was the anniversary, my mom got a baby sister. My Aunt Cheryl was born. So here it is, August of 1943, but the year still promised more for them because by the end of the year, my grandpa was in the Navy and deployed to the Pacific, where he served as a Seabee. And not surprisingly, at that stage, my grandmother once again my young grandmother packed up her 2 very young daughters and went back to Mounds, I suppose to benefit from the support network, the family support network. And for the next 3 years, they were down there without their dad, my Grandpa George. The war ended, as you all know, and in 1946, my grandpa got back from the Pacific and promptly packed up the family again, and back up north they came. This time they settled in Dearborn, and it was in Dearborn where the roots were to be sunk. They were now a family of 4, standing room only over here. Family of 4, and life smoothed out for them at that point. It was pretty normal for the next 9 years, and that would take us up to 1955 when my mother was a senior at Dearborn High. And at Dearborn High, she had a very good friend that she called Susie. My brother and I would come to refer to her as Aunt Sue. They were friends their whole life. And where are the youngrins? Here comes youngrins. Here comes the promise part. So as you all recall, that my father from 10 months ago, he applied to Michigan State and was denied. But my mother had a close brush with Michigan State too, which I just learned. And that was her best friend Susie, fall of 54 or winter of 55, went to her and said, you know what, Deanna? Because she was Deanna Rose Cowles then, she hadn't become DB or Deeb yet. Deanna, let's apply for Michigan State, what do you say? And I think a lot of you knew my mom pretty well and won't be too surprised by the reply. My mom says, Susie, that's too big. That's way too big. So she turned right around and convinced Susie to apply to Alma College. And they both were accepted to Alma College, and that started the Alma phase of my mom's life. And like all phases of her life, she developed sincere and deep and lifelong friendships. In addition to Susie, there were 2 more young ladies who became part of the gang. One is Dorothy Sundeck, and she's coming today. Dorothy, are you here? There, Dorothy, can you raise your hand? Thank you. Thank you so much, Dorothy. And the other was Linda. I think they called her Linny Nolan. Today, both Linny lives in Texas and Susie is in Colorado, and I've had contact with them. And in one of these cruel twists of COVID, neither of them could be here. But Dorothy, we're so glad to have you to represent the Alma years and the years after. And my mom maintained friendships with these 3 ladies her whole life. While they were all still here in the state of Michigan, there were lunches and they were friends. Eventually a couple moved away, but I know that my mom and Dorothy saw each other not too long ago, I'm sure, for a lunch. But deep friendships weren't the only thing that happened at Alma. She also met my dad. Um, and in 1959, she wound up graduating from Alma. She had a degree in Bachelor of Arts, English, and a teaching certificate. She promptly went off to start teaching at the elementary school level. And her first job was in Garden City, Michigan. And I just learned, talking to my aunt, that she chose Garden City over Dearborn schools because they paid a little bit more. And, you know, referencing my aunt, I forgot to mention something in the beginning. I thanked everybody for being here, but I'd be remiss not to acknowledge those who couldn't be here and sorely, sorely wanted to, whose hearts were broken as they told me they just couldn't make it. And number one on that list was my mom's only sibling, Cheryl, my Aunt Cheryl, who lives only 45 minutes from here, but who just recently completed chemotherapy, immune system compromised, and she just couldn't do it. So she started working in Garden City as a teacher. A few months later, she got married to my dad, that would have been 61. No, 1960, I'm sorry, that would have been, exactly 60 years ago. They were married. And then in 1961, they started their family. In July, as Charlie was born that year. They were renting a small apartment in Dearborn. And that led to about 8 years of sort of an odyssey. My dad was working for GMC, truck and coach, and he was calling on the dealerships around, sales and service. And so he started traveling. The first assignment was in Cincinnati, and I think they got there in 63. In 64, the family grew. Yours truly came to the planet, and where's Uncle Bill? Yes, Bill, I am a born Buckeye. I hate to admit it. And that didn't last long. I don't remember anything about being a damn Buckeye. But the next stop was Indianapolis, Indiana. And Bill, it equally breaks my heart to know my beloved Wolverine football team has never been to that city either. You have to be a college football fan to understand that one. I do remember a little bit about Indianapolis. In fact, there's a picture somewhere out there, a little house rented. But I think that by then, my dad and mom had begun to scheme or try to work it with GMC so that they came back to this area. And after about 7 years of traveling, indeed in 1968, they made that happen, came back to the area. I'm pretty sure the goal was to be here, and I don't know why exactly the first landing spot wasn't here, but the first house that my mom and dad ever bought together was down the road in Gulf Manor, in the back of Gulf Manor on Buffalo Street. But we were only there for a couple years. We were only there for a couple years until, and I think they were looking in here. And in 1970, 50 years ago exactly, this opportunity popped up on Honeysuckle Street where we're all standing today, and we came here. And that's where my grandparents and my mom's, her family sank their roots in Dearborn, and then my family began to sink their roots here. And from there, I think to most of you, the story is a little bit more familiar, but I do just want to say that while my dad came back to West Acres with a certain West Acres pedigree, my mom was new. She was a newcomer. But I think she earned her stripes pretty quickly. I know that she served in various positions in the Women's Club, and at one point was president of the Women's Club for many, many, many years. I don't know how many. She was a volunteer loan officer for the credit union, and I don't know how many other volunteer efforts with Aquacade or the Field Day or the Artist Market or this and that, but she incorporated herself full steam ahead into the West Acres community. And it's there that once again, in this stage of her life, she made lots and lots of new friends. All the women in her generation, who most of whom were raising families, they all became close friends, and you'll see lots of pictures spread around of their girls' getaways up north that Jan and Bob Elfin were gracious enough to host every year for 1,000 years. And I think those were probably outside of family amongst my mom's happiest moments. Also worth mentioning at that point is when I got to Clifford Smart Middle School, which is called junior high, but apparently now they call it middle school, she decided to renew her career. And she went back to teaching, this time at the high school level, and I think she did it for 14, 15 years. Started off at Walled Lake Western as an aide this time. Initially an aide in a program that was designed for sort of at-risk kids. And then she jumped over to Walled Lake Central. And I think those were really happy years for her. I think, is Carol Lyons here? I think she'll be here later, but she made lots of friendships there too. One teacher named Mark Willard. I think she really, really enjoyed that work, and I think was good at it. So that's pretty much the bio on my mom. And now I'd like to just spend a couple minutes sharing with you what my mom was to me. And probably what she was to me overlaps quite a bit with some of you at least. And I want to do it by mentioning three characteristics. By no means captures all of her, but I think any understanding of my mom, these three characteristics would be part of the basis of that understanding. You're gonna have to bear with me for the next 20 minutes, 15 minutes. This could be tough. So, the first characteristic I would mention would be devotion. Devotion to family and friends. Family, Charlie, myself, in later years, the grandkids, who I think gave her even more pleasure than those wonderful moments up on the deck at the Elfland's cabin. Me personally, I have a couple anecdotes I'd like to share, which are small, but after a lot of thought, I decided they were kind of indicative. So, when I entered high school, Walled Lake Central, I weighed 98 pounds. I had a friend who was on the wrestling team. And it seemed to me that might do me good, I could wear the singlet and be kind of muscular for those fellow students who I wanted to impress. But it didn't go so well. I wasn't born to be a wrestler, but I did wrestle during the winter season, each week on the JV squad, my freshman and sophomore year. And at every single match, I did my JV thing, wrestling 98 or 112 pounds, like 98, 105 my freshman year, I think. The Russells are here. I was wrestling with Rick Russell. And guess who was in the bleachers? For every match, every home match, and I think a few of the away matches. And it was tough for me to take those lumps. I was a teenager. But now that I'm a dad, I think back to my mom sitting in the bleachers. And not only how difficult it must have been for her to watch that comedy, but to find the right words in the car. In the car on the way home, words that would not only support, but that allowed me to get home that night with a little bit of my teenage pride left. And then the other one is, I think a lot of you know, I spent a lot of time in Chile. Most of the 90s, I was in Chile. And got down there in 91, and one of the first few conversations with my parents, I said, Mom, Dad, you know what? I think my addiction to peanut butter is going to have to come to an end. Why? Well, in the supermarket down there in that little town in Chile, they sold peanut butter, but it was only a little jar, and it was priced more like caviar than peanut butter. And I was trying to make a living at the end of the world, and decided that wasn't going to be part of it. But you know what? In about 2 months after that, maybe 2.5 months, I got a box. The big jar of Jiffy. Bingo! And God bless her. From there, every 6 or 7 weeks, I don't remember exactly the frequency, but she had it timed perfectly. She would shovel out the $75, $80 it cost to ship one of those big jugs out there, and the postal man, the Chilean postal guy, would ride up on his bike, and in his front basket, he'd have the box. And that's what I call devotion. And I can only imagine, what she had to fight through with my dad to spend those $75, $80 every 6 weeks. I think some of you probably have other stories of devotion that, afterwards, if anybody wants to share them, that would be great. The next characteristic, 2 of 3, I would mention is integrity. And with my mom, there was never any, I can't remember any monumental moment where me, my brother, her, my dad, friends arrived at a ginormous moral crossroads, and my mom guided herself for one of us down the right hard path and not the easy wrong path. But what I do remember is, I'll just say 1,001 correct decisions, ethical decisions, choosing that little path that wasn't maybe so easy as opposed to the easy wrong one. And any integrity I have today, the base was those 1,001 lessons she taught me. So I don't think you can understand Devi without understanding her integrity. The final one is selflessness. And by selflessness, this is where I was practicing, I really went down, so give me a second. By selflessness, I don't mean self-abnegation. She didn't live in poverty. She wasn't Mother Teresa. But if you'll permit me, I'm going to use a sports analogy, a basketball team. If our family had been a basketball team, my mom would have been the one that the commentators all described as the glue guy. The glue guy. Maybe he only scored 3 or 4 points a game, but probably got 13, 14 rebounds and made all the good passes. So the next day in the papers, she didn't get the headline. She probably wasn't even in the first paragraph. But she is what allowed the team to have any success that they had. So that's what I mean by selflessness. Think of Dennis Rodman. No, don't think of Dennis Rodman. No, really don't think of Dennis Rodman. So on that, I'll just close with a couple of words. Look, I stand here in front of you guys, and I can't claim to know if our human condition promises any existence after it's over. For my part, I don't know if there's a soul that gets transferred to another body or another creature for another go around at this beautiful, beautiful rodeo, or if it goes up and becomes an angel and looks down on the beautiful rodeo. I don't know those things. But what I do know, what I know, is the life that my mother lived, and how that life obliges me to a life of love, admiration, luck, and gratitude to have been her son. And my wish is that, well, I think her life warrants a place in the heart of each one of you and in your good thoughts. And may it be so. With that, I think Tom Alflin wants to lead everybody in a prayer. Tom, would you like to come up?